Between August 9th and 11th, 1971, 10 innocent civilians were massacred on the streets of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Belfast, by the British Army. Yesterday, finally, the truth was revealed, was proved. What a lot of people knew, even way back then. Justice has a way of eventually finding its way into the light. And yesterday was one of those moments. It was the Ballymurphy Massacre, as it's become known. And today I'd like to talk about it, and I'd like to tell you about it, because these people's lives were cut short in a tragedy. Something that happened just up the road from me here. Something that young people today could barely believe could happen in a place like this. But it did happen. And not all that long ago. Let's have a look at it. So yesterday, finally, after almost 50 years, a public inquest into what has become known as the Ballymurphy Massacre reached its conclusion. And it concluded that the 10 people who died were all innocent civilians. 9 of them they judged, although it's not a criminal trial, it's an inquest. The panel of judges concluded that they were just innocent civilians caught up in a crazy situation at a crazy time and in a crazy place, and they all lost their lives unjustifiably at the hands of the British Army on the streets of Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom, killed by the army that was supposed to protect them. Let's have a look into it. Let's see what it's all about. Let's see what happened. And let's hope nothing like this ever happens again on the streets of our land. So let's get straight into it. LBC News. You see the headline there. Ballymurphy Massacre, 10 innocent people killed without justification. That's from the Coroner. That was the upshot of what they come up with. 10 people killed in Belfast 50 years ago in shootings involving British soldiers were entirely innocent. Quotation. A coroner has ruled. The army has been found to be responsible for 9 of the 10 deaths in August 1971, which included a mother of 8 and a Catholic priest. Northern Ireland's First Minister, Arlene Foster, who I'm no fan of, but here's a tweet from her. You can see it there. This has been a long road for the Ballymurphy families. 50 years later, the court has considered the evidence and the findings should be accepted. I commend the families for their tenacity. No, fair play. I can't take it away from her. That's a good tweet, and the right thing to say. Let's jump on over here to RT, and they have an article here. UK soldiers unjustifiably killed 9 innocent Northern Irish people during 1971 Troubles. That's what this time period was known as, the Troubles. That's what they called it. Incident and inquiry. RT goes on to say, a judge-led inquiry has found that UK soldiers shot dead 9 entirely innocent Northern Irish people, including a priest and the mother, during 1971 incident in the Troubles that sparked a surge in violence. Well, I remember that surge in violence. I lived through my youth with that daily. And it was a daily thing. Every day on the news there was reports of bombs going off, people shot, killed, maimed. It just became part of the news. You almost, crazy to say it, but you almost became anaesthetised to it, and it was only happening a few miles up the road from me. So it was just a fact of real life in that time, daily life in that time. They go on to say the inquest looking into the deaths of 10 victims was launched in November 2018 and led by Justice Siobhan Keegan, hearing from more than 100 witnesses to report on one of the most controversial incidents in Northern Ireland's Troubles. The incident, known as the Ballymurphy Massacre, resulted in the shooting of 10 individuals on the streets of a Belfast neighbourhood between August 9 and 11, 1971. Among those killed was a 38-year-old priest who was helping an injured man when he was shot, and a mother of 8. The woman, a Catholic who had only recently served British soldiers tea in her home, was trying to assist a fatally wounded teenager when she was shot. Justice Keegan stated that despite finding that 9 of the victims were killed due to the use of unjustifiable or disproportionate force, there wasn't enough evidence to say that the military was responsible for the death of one of the individuals, John James McKeer, who was shot while travelling to work. It's just that they figured that they couldn't prove that the army shot him. Quote, all of the deceased were entirely innocent of any wrongdoing on the day in question. Keegan noted as she concluded her findings. She also said that allegations that some of the victims were gunmen were, quote, wrong and, quote, should be dispelled, because they weren't. They were smeared that way as part of a cover-up to try and justify the unjustifiable. So what exactly happened? What led to this outcome yesterday? The culmination. What's it a culmination of? Well, let's have a look into what actually happened and what is the Ballymurphy Massacre. So here's an interesting article here, and I found this. I didn't fully know myself the exact events. I knew in the round, I knew roughly what had happened, but I didn't know the exact events, so I wanted to find out for myself. I was around at the time, but let's just say I was quite young and I wasn't fully compos mentis. So here's an article. It was written a couple of years ago. It was updated a few months ago. This is from written by a guy called Robert Verkijk. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Ballymurphy. What really happened in Northern Ireland's hidden massacre? It was a massacre every bit as shameful as the Bloody Sunday killings. Well, let's have a look. Let's find out what actually did happen. Right, it was a massacre every bit as shameful as the Bloody Sunday killings. 10 Catholics, including a priest and a 45-year-old mother of 8, were gunned down by the British Army in Ballymurphy in 1971. The shootings were carried out by the 1st Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, who 5 months later were sent to Londonderry to quell sectarian disturbances, but ended in the killing of 13 more Catholics, plunging the region into 30 years, in 30-year troubles. It was basically a civil war, essentially. Yet, if the lessons of Ballymurphy had been learned, many believe the recent history of Northern Ireland need not have been so bloody. Had the UK government properly investigated the terrible mistakes that had been made in the summer of 71 in Belfast and acted to pull back the soldiers, Bloody Sunday could have been avoided. Now remember, there was no internet back then. There was no mass communication like we know it today. There was word of mouth, telephones, and then you had the the media, essentially, the couple of TV channels, and there only was a couple, and the very few mainstream publications, newspapers. Apart from that, that was it. So the British authorities, and I remember it throughout the 70s and 80s, they were very confident that they could stifle things, they could shape narratives, and they could control what people knew. And by holding various, if you like, show trials, mock trials, sham trials, they could just sweep things under the carpet. And it worked to a degree, and it's only now, way after the fact, that a lot of this stuff is being unravelled. It's being shown for what it was. Because now we have the internet, we have a myriad of ways to dig into these things, to get to the truth. Let's go on with the article. For the families of those killed by the British Army in the West Belfast estate of Ballymurphy 47 years ago, there are more pressing questions about how and why their innocent brother, sons, priest and a mother came to lose their lives. Then he goes on to talk about the inquest which has just happened. For Rita Bonner, who lost a brother, while another brother was tortured by soldiers, the next few weeks will be critical in getting to the truth. Well, we know the result now, and we know they were proven innocent. Rita Bonner is quoted as saying, "It needn't have been like this." Miss Bonner, then aged 12, who had friends on both sides of the religious divide, because it was a religious civil war, Protestant versus Catholics. That's essentially what it boiled down to. The Protestants were pro staying in the United Kingdom. The Catholics were, for the most part, nationalists and wanted to join the Republic of Ireland. When the soldiers first arrived in 1969, we welcomed them with cups of tea because we thought they were going to protect us from the Protestant attacks. The Protestants, who were the majority in the north, they had been pretty much running the show and running it with it, left to their own devices by Westminster, by London, and kind of things got a bit out of hand. They started. There was all kinds of inequality springing up. They were the Catholic minority were getting more and more oppressed. They were getting more and more disenfranchised. Basically, the majority Protestant population were riding roughshod over the other side of the population, and things came to a head in the late 60s. There started to be protests, marches, similar to what you saw in America. And they tried to crack this. They brought a sledgehammer to crack a nut. They brought in the paras, the parachute regiments, they brought in the British Army. And at first, yes, they were there to just basically try and stop mobs attacking, innocent people and whatever. But the whole thing devolved into this craziness. It was a powder keg, and the worst thing they could have done was thrown a match into it. But that's what they did. They threw a match into it. Fiery times. Let's go on. Towards the end of the 1960s, the segregated Catholic communities, inspired by the American Civil Rights Movement, began campaigning for fairer treatment, staging peaceful placard-waving marches through the streets of Belfast. These attracted Protestant counter-protests, which soon spiralled into violence. In the Falls Road, Catholic families were being burnt out of their homes, and many sought refuge in Ballymurphy. Ms. Bonner, now a Belfast nursery school caretaker and mother of 3, says, quote, "I remember going to the school and seeing families sleeping on mattresses. I would look after the little children, push the prams to give the mummies some respite. We hoped the soldiers had come to help us to stop the violence. Indeed, relations between the Catholic community and the army had begun so well that some of the girls married British soldiers. But in 1971, the political situation suddenly changed and the soldiers were ordered to arrest Republican activists operating in the area. Quote, "The army wasn't friendly anymore," says Miss Bonner. We'd be at the local disco and the soldiers would burst in and search all the young boys. Soon afterwards, the British government decided to impose internment, another disastrous idea that the British came up with. It was a decision that would have disastrous ramifications for the future of Northern Ireland. For the Catholic community of Ballymurphy, the impact was immediate and deadly. So essentially what they decided to do was just round up everyone and anyone they even suspected might be an agitator, might be involved in any way with the nationalist side. Now, as I say, they put in the parachute regiment. These were really, really tough guys. These were guys you did not mess with. These were one of the top regiments that the British Army had, and it was the British authorities decided, well, we're going to stamp this out, we're going to nip it in the bud, we're going to come in hard, we're going to come in fast, so let's send in the tough guys. Now, in charge of them, the article goes on to say who was in charge. The British Army commander, Brigadier Frank Kitson, was commander of 39 Air Portable Brigade from September 1970 to April 72. He had been decorated for his service during the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya and the Malayan emergency, in which thousands of local people had been killed while Britain tried to hold on to its empire. So this was a guy who had form. He obviously had been a guy they had sent to various trouble spots, shall we say, to fix things. So they obviously thought they'd send him to this latest trouble spot, except the difference now being that the trouble spot was on their own soil. Not the same as tackling the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. Kitson was the author of the book Low Intensity Operations, which would become a British Army manual on counterinsurgency. It was Kitson's methods and policy on tackling civil disobedience and sectarian violence that have been questioned following the Ballymurphy and Bloody Sunday massacres. 3 days of horror. At 5 a.m. on 9th of August, around 600 soldiers of the 1st Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, entered the estate from different directions. They began booting indoors, looking for suspects, many of whom were dragged from their beds. So you can see, that was no small operation. They were going in hard and fast. Later that evening, gunfire broke out, and a local man, Bobby Clark, who had been trying to carry children to safety, was shot and wounded in Springfield Park. Ballymurphy priest Father Hugh McMullen telephoned Henry Taggart Army Post to tell them he was going to help the injured man, and he entered the field. So he rang them, he warned him, he said, look, this guy lying out there, he's been shot, I am going to help him. The article goes on, waving a white baby grow, he found Bobby Clark badly wounded. But as the priest administered the last rites and attempted to leave the field, he was fatally shot in the back. When a 19-year-old Frank Quinn went to help Father Mullen and Clark, he was shot in the back of the head. Clark, the only one of the trio to survive his wounds, he was the only one to survive his wounds. But the killings had provoked the community into reaction. Local youths tried to resist soldiers while families fled their homes after coming under attack from loyalist mobs. Without warning, the British Army opened fire from the direction of Henry Taggart Army Base in the Melee. Noel Phillips was shot in the backside as he lay crying for help. Joan Connolly, a mother of 8, went to his aid. Sorry, this is harder than I thought it would be. But in her attempt to help, she was shot in the face. She bled to death. Where she had fallen. I can't do this. Can't do this. Start again. Another victim, Daniel Taggart, the father of 13, had been shot 14 times. At this point, witnesses accused the army of atrocities, saying that soldiers executed the already wounded Noel Phillips by shooting him in the head with a handgun. Further testimony alleges that Joseph Murphy was shot at close range with a rubber bullet into his open wound, and he died 3 weeks later from his injuries. The next day, Miss Bonner's brother, John Laverty, 20, escorted her and his 2 other sisters to the community centre, where buses were ferrying families to the Republic of Ireland to escape the violence. Miss Bonner recalls, "He carried our bags and waited with us until the bus left. I remember him waving us goodbye. It was the last time Rita would see her brother alive." The following morning, during a lull in the shooting, John and his brother Terry, 18, left their home. John didn't get very far before he was shot in the back by soldiers who were descending Black Mountain, which dominates the landscape of Ballymurphy. A second bullet fatally damaged his vital organs. Shot twice. Terry Laverty was later arrested by the soldiers and taken to a barracks, where he was allegedly badly beaten and tortured. It was the Red Cross who broke the news to Rita that one brother was dead and another was being held by the army. She returned from Ireland on the 13th of August for her brother's funeral. Quote, "As we were travelling back, I just hoped they had made a mistake," she says now. "But there was no error about the number of dead." Here they are there. 10 people. The events of August 1971 shattered lives. The lives of Miss Bonner and her family and many others affected by the shootings. The British Army responded by claiming that the soldiers had come under sustained fire from Republican gunmen and that all those shot were armed or involved in unlawful resistance. Yet no forensic evidence has been provided which proves any one of the victims fired a weapon that day or was indeed part of the Republican armed resistance. In 2015, Terry Laverty, 64, finally won his fight for justice, to have his name cleared 44 years after he was convicted for riotous behaviour and sentenced to 6 months in prison. Mr. Laverty had been stopped and arrested by soldiers around the same time as his brother John was killed in the shooting. He claims he was badly beaten and tortured before being released and then put on trial for rioting. Mr. Laverty's case was referred back to Belfast County Court by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which quashed the conviction after hearing that the sole evidence against Mr. Laverty was a soldier statement, which was later retracted. At the time, Mr. Laverty accused the army of murdering his brother John. Quote, "As he lay in the street bleeding to death, I was being arrested just yards away," he said. "It was 2 days before I knew he was dead, and almost 2 days before my parents knew that I was not." Mr. Leverty said his wrongful conviction and imprisonment was based on the word of a soldier who has admitted more than 40 years later that he lied. Quote, "He lied in his statement and he lied in court. I was not rioting. There was no riot." Staggering stuff. Staggering. What now? Filmmaker Callum McRae, the director of the Ballymurphy precedent, has spent 4 years painstakingly researching the events that took place in Belfast during the summer of 1971. His finished film is not only a powerful account of what happened, but it has also uncovered new perspectives on the killings. Testimonies from a number of witnesses, including British soldiers, indicate that, amid the confusion, members of the 1st Battalion may have come under fire from their own soldiers, holding ground at opposing locations in the estate. This, McRae believes, may have falsely led the army to believe there were gunmen firing at them. The film also examines the reputation of the 1st Battalion and senior British Army officers like Frank Kitson, a veteran of counterinsurgencies in Malaya and Cyprus, who had used the paras as shock troops against so-called no-go Catholic areas. Ballymurphy raises real questions about the government's role in turning Northern Ireland's civil rights marches, very similar to those led by Martin Luther King in America, into the terrible 30 years violence which has characterised the Troubles, says McRae. The Ballymurphy Massacre has been hidden from public knowledge and focus. According to the Justice Campaign, unlike Bloody Sunday, no journalists were present. No camera crews captured the events. And there was no international condemnation of the killings. There you go. There you go. Cameras weren't there, press wasn't there. Nobody cared, except the people who were there. I don't know. It's only when you read the events you just think, my God, how could something like that? How could that happen here? How could that happen a few miles away from where I live, where I grew up? In the light of today's society and the things we worry about today, it's just hard to believe that such an atrocity, such inhumanity, such a blatant disregard for human life could have happened here, with a first world modern top-ranking army like the British Army, one of the most historic and revered armies in the world. It's just staggering. The only solace, not that there's, how can you have solace in something like this, is that eventually, albeit late, very, very late, truth has come out. And the truth needs to come out. Because it's only by getting to the truth of these things, as heinous as they are to contemplate, that we can move forward. And that we can ensure that something like this never, ever, ever happens again.